Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Asma Abid, a roll number 32 from BS Botany department. The topic of my presentation is sampling. The content of my presentation includes sampling definitions, types of sampling, probability sampling methods and non-probability sampling methods. So before jumping into the sampling, first you need to understand the difference between population and sample and identify the target population of your research. So first of all, what is population? Population is basically groups of things, items or units under investigations. Um, it is basically the entire group that you want to draw conclusions about, from which you want to investigate something. On the other hand, sample is obtained by collecting information only about some member of a population. Sample is specified groups of individuals that you want to collect data from. Now, sampling is basically act of collecting samples to produce meaningful information. Means that sampling is taking out samples from the population. For example, when you conduct research about a group of people, it is rarely possible to collect data from every person in that group. Instead, you select a sample. The sample of the group of individuals who will actually participate in the research. This is basically sampling. Next, if we move on to the process of sampling, this process of sampling is to get a representative and homogeneous sample. Now here the word representative means the content of analytical samples reflect content of bulk sample, and homogeneous samples mean that the analytical sample has same content throughout. For example, you are taking a sample in a solid state, then you must collect all the samples from the population in the solid state to achieve the homogeneity of the sampling. Next, if we move on to the types of sampling, there are two basic types of sampling. These are probability sampling and non-probability sampling. So the probability sampling, as the name indicates, is a sampling based upon chance event, or you can say random selection. It is by chance sampling method. It involves random selection, allowing you to make strong statistical inferences about the whole group. Non-probability sampling, as the name indicates, is a non-random selection. It is by choice, not by chance. So it involves non-random selection based on convenience or other criteria, allowing you to easily collect data. Here is an overview of types of probability sampling. So the first type of probability sampling is simple random sampling. The simple random sampling is the sampling in which every member of a population has equal chance of being selected. The sampling frame should include the whole population. To conduct this type of sampling, you can use random number generators or other techniques that are based entirely on chance. The example of a simple random sampling is that you want to select random sample of 100 employees from a company. You assign a number to every employee in the company from 1 to 100 or so on, and use random numbers to select 100 members. This is the simplest example of simple random sampling. Another example is that uh, a class full of students, every student have a chance to ask a question about the lecture. The next sampling is systematic sampling. Systematic sampling is similar to the simple random sampling, but it is slightly easier to conduct. Every member of the population are listed with numbers, but instead of randomly generating the numbers, individuals are chosen at regular intervals. For example, all employees of the company are listed in alphabetic orders. From the first 10 numbers, you select a random number. Suppose you select the number 6. Now from number 6 onward, every 10th person on the list is selected. These include number 6, 16, 26, 36, 46 and so on. And you end up with a sample of 100 people. The next type of probability sampling is stratified sampling. Stratified samplings involve dividing the population into subpopulations that may differ in important ways. It allows you to draw more precise conclusions by ensuring that every subgroup is properly represented in the sample. To use this method, you divide the population into subgroups. The subgroups are called strata based on the relevant characteristics, example, gender, age range, income, job role, etc. The example of stratified sampling includes a company has 800 female employees and 200 male employees. You want to ensure that the sample reflects the gender balance of the company. So you sort the population into two strata based on the gender, female and male. Using these random samples on each group, selecting 80 women and 20 men, which give you a representative of 100 employees. Uh, um, this was all for the stratified sampling. The next type of probability sampling is cluster sampling. Cluster sampling also involves dividing of the population into subgroups, but each subgroup should have similar characteristics to the whole sample. Um, how it differentiates with the stratified sampling is that in stratified sampling, you divide the population into subgroups that may differ in important ways. For example, relevant characteristics, example gender, age, as I mentioned earlier. But in cluster samplings, each group should have similar characteristics to the whole sample. Instead of sampling individuals from each subgroup, you randomly sample the entire subgroups. If it is practically possible, you might include every individual from each sample cluster. If clusters themselves are large, you can also sample individuals from within each cluster using one of the technique above. This is called multi-stage sampling. So the example for cluster sampling is that, um, uh, for example, a company of Jews or any company has offices in 10 cities across the country, um, all roughly with the same number of employees in similar roles. Now you don't have the capacity to travel each and every office to collect the data, so you randomly select 3 offices and uh, um, collect the sample from the employees of the offices. So this is your clusters. These 3 offices are basically your clusters. Next, if we move on, is the non-probability sampling. Non-probability sampling is here an overview of this type of sampling. So the first type of non-probability sampling is convenience sampling. A convenience sample simply includes the individual who happen to be most accessible to the researcher. This is an easy and inexpensive way to gather initial data. But there is no way to tell if the sample is the representative of the population, so it cannot produce generalizable results. Example of convenience sampling is that in the malls, you often see companies distribute their promotional pamphlets and ask questions at malls or on crowded street with randomly selected participants. Businesses use this sampling method to gather information to address critical issues arising from the market. The next type of the sampling is quota-based sampling. In quota-based sampling, the sampling in which researcher creates sample involving individuals that represent a population. Basically, population is divided into specific quotas. For example, a cigarette company wants to find out what age group prefer what brand of cigarette in a particular city. They apply survey quota on the age groups of different quotas, for example 20 to 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50, and so on. From this information, the researcher find out the smoking trend among the population of the city. The next type of sampling is purposive sampling. Purposive sampling is also known as judgmental sampling, involves the researcher using their expertise to select a sample that is most useful to the purpose of the researcher. It is often used in qualitative research when the researcher wants to gain detailed knowledge about a specific phenomena rather than making a statistical interference or where the population is very small and specified. Example of purposive sampling is that before launching a new product into a market, a company launch a product in specific experts in the market to provide valuable feedback for the product improvement. The next type of sampling is uh, snowball sampling. Snowball sampling, if the population is hard to access, snowball sampling can be used to recirculate participants via other participants. The number of people you have access to snowballs as you get in the contact with more people. For example, you are researching experiences of homelessness in your city. Since there is no list of homeless people in the city, probability sampling isn't possible. So you meet one person who agrees to participate in the research, and he or she puts you in contact with other homeless people that she knows in the area. This is the example of snowball sampling. This was all for my presentation. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, do let me know.